Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, which is an update from TESOL International Association's Intersection Task Force. Thank you all for joining us. Today's presentation is going to be recorded, and the recording will be made available in the TESOL Resource Center. Before we begin, please be sure to mute your microphone and not turn on your webcam. Please also note that there will be question and answer periods throughout today's presentation, so you can queue up a question by typing it into the chat at any time during today's presentation. With that, I will hand it over to our first speaker, Joe McVeigh, who's chair of the Intersection Task Force. So here's Joe.
Great. Thank you very much, Michelle. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Joe McVeigh. I'm the chair of TESOL's Intersection Task Force, and on behalf of the task force, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, either in person or perhaps by listening to the recording. And I want to apologize for the short notice about this webinar, but assure you that there will be other opportunities for intersection leaders and intersection members to learn about the findings of the task force. I wanted to preface my remarks with a word of encouragement to those of you who are intersection leaders. Everybody on this task force has experience as an intersection leader, and I personally, and I think that the other members of the task force as well, hold intersections and the work that you do very, very dear to our hearts. As far as we're concerned, the work that you do is absolutely central to the way that TESOL serves its members. And we know that any time that a group of this type comes into existence, there's a certain amount of anxiety and concern on the part of the members that things are going to be done away with, that things are going to change, that certain intersections might disappear altogether. And I just wanted to reassure you that it's never been the intention of the TESOL board or of this group to do away with intersections in any form. But what we did want to do was to take a fresh look at intersections and the way that they serve TESOL members. And this is being done in the context of a larger work on the part of TESOL, examining its structure in general. As you know, TESOL is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, and any organization that's been around for 50 years is bound to find that there are aspects of it where the way that things are organized has just sort of evolved over the course of time. And it's considered a best practice among associations to occasionally take a step back and take a look at the organization as a whole and consider if what we're doing is the best way that we could be doing it. Next slide, please, Michelle. So in response to this idea of self-examination, the board itself did a certain amount of work and then commissioned a group called the Governance Review Task Force. And this group, which submitted its report in 2014, examined TESOL's standing committees, its intersections, and its affiliates. And if you're really interested in this, if you Google TESOL Governance Review Task Force report, you can find a PDF of the entire report online at the TESOL website. But here is a summary of some of the findings from that report from looking at standing committees, intersections, and affiliates. They found that the association is spread kind of thin and fragmented, that the governance system was not integrated or strategically aligned. They found that leaders and members wanted to contribute meaningfully to the work of the association, to be accountable, and to receive acknowledgement. They also found that many leaders felt unprepared for their jobs when they began their positions, and that too much of their time was spent on administrative issues such as writing reports and not enough time on the real matters of professional interest to their members. Next slide. Now, in particular, the Governance Review Task Force looked at intersection leaders and surveyed them and found that many leaders weren't really very aware of how ISs fit into TESOL's larger structure and purpose and decision-making process, that there was too much time spent on administrative details, that communication with other levels of the association was often inadequate. They found that the quality of work performed by intersections varied greatly, and that the vast majority of activity focused on the convention, which is attended by less than a third of TESOL members. I think it's probably very natural because we all come together on an annual basis at the conference, and because even the standing rules governing intersections say, well, your top priority should be presenting a program at the conference, and that really seems to dominate what intersections do. And so it kind of raised the question, well, what about all those other TESOL members who aren't able to make it to the conference? Next slide. So in response to the report of the Governance Review Task Force, the TESOL board did two things. First, they reorganized the standing committees into what are now called the professional advisory councils. And secondly, it struck two task forces, one to examine the affiliates and the other to examine the interest sections, and that's us. Next slide. And when the board creates a task force, it gives it a charge, and this is a very specific term, meaning here's what we want you to do. These are the parameters that we'd like you to follow. So we were asked to present options to the board on possible models and structures for knowledge-based member communities. You'll see this term come up a little bit later, sometimes in an abbreviated form, KBMC, knowledge-based member community. It's the word that's commonly used in professional associations to describe groups like intersections. And the hope was to achieve a vision that would include cultivating knowledge, communicating knowledge, identifying professional issues, supporting a leadership pipeline, and that would align with the strategic plan of TESOL. Next slide. So what we were asked to do was to conduct research on contemporary forms and functions of knowledge-based member communities in professional associations. We were asked to analyze the current intersections in TESOL and to present possible options for the board to consider in the areas of function, of structure, and of communication. Next slide. So what the board did was to put out a call for interested people to serve on this task force. People applied and gave references and talked about why they would want to do it, and we ended up with this crack team of people. That's me in the top left corner. I'm the chair. I've previously been the chair of the Intensive English Programs intersection, of the predecessor of the intersection leadership coordinating committee, and a TESOL board member. On the right, you can see our board member, Aya Matsuda, who is the person on the board who has the most to do with intersections. Then we have Tamara Jones, who's a past chair of both IEP and also SPLIS, which is Speech, Pronunciation, and Listening intersection, and she's also a current member of the Intersection Leadership Council. Justin Schul's a past chair of the CALL-IS. Chris Hiller is a past chair of Program Administration. Todd Rucker with Second Language Writing. Elizabeth Chan in the lower left is the current chair of the Social Responsibility intersection. And then we had great participation and support from the TESOL Central Office. Sarah Saar now heads up our professional engagement department at TESOL, but for many, many years was the chief liaison with intersections. John Segota is the Associate Executive Director of TESOL, and Michelle Kim is the person who currently has the greatest connection from the office with intersections. So we had a great group of people, and we worked really hard. Next slide. And here's the process that we went through over since June, meeting electronically. Our thought as we started was that we didn't want to start by looking at TESOL's intersections. We wanted to start by looking outward at at what other associations do. So the first thing that we did was to explore the component relations literature. That is, within professional associations, there's a research literature on how groups like intersections function best. We also looked at the literature around communities of practice, which are quite similar to components. And based on our findings there, we came up with a number of ideas, and then we developed a questionnaire and an interview that we could take to other professional associations. We started off with about 30 associations and eventually narrowed that list down to about 15. Following that, we started turning inward more and looking specifically at TESOL, and we reviewed the Intersection's annual reports and the minutes of the Intersection Assembly going back a number of years. We also reviewed the report of the 2014 Governance Review Task Force, which had in itself surveyed intersection leaders, and some of the results from a general membership survey of 2014. And then based on everything that we'd learned so far, we developed a couple of surveys, one of which went out to intersection leaders in early February and another to the general membership. We got everything back. We kind of synthesized our findings and developed some options for the TESOL board, and we have submitted that report to them. So our hope today is to share our findings from all of these different types of research that we did. And next slide. The first person you'll be hearing from, or the next person, is Justin Schul, past chair of the CALL intersection, who's going to share with you some of our findings from the component relations literature, from the communities of practice literature, a little bit from the online gaming literature. So I will turn it over to you, Justin. Make sure to unmute your microphone.
Thanks, Joe. So the first thing I'll talk about is kind of some of the things we looked at in the other associations and the literature. The idea of KPMCs in business organizations and knowledge-based community is a structure in which the members work together to resolve issues and improve the output quality of the business. And so the same kind of structure applies here in TESOL, but we're more interested in how do we improve the value that members get and how do we resolve issues in the field and in the organization through these knowledge-based member communities. We also looked at the idea of relevance and how the market is changing. In the past, as Joe said, associations are focused on a convention, face-to-face meetings, and nowadays attendance at conventions is dropping. Young people from younger generations are looking more at how they can get year-round value, how they can connect with other members virtually versus face-to-face. So that's something that that we need to take into account. Also, members, and usually they're universities or schools that are paying their membership fees, are looking for more value for the money that they're spending. And there's also an increased use of technology. How can TESOL take advantage of that technology to connect with people better? We also looked at the idea of time and how most leaders in TESOL are volunteers with full-time jobs who need to make the best use of the time that they spend serving. And then members also want to make the best use of the time that they spend when they're looking for professional development or connecting with other members about a particular topic. One important concept we looked at was the need for nimbleness. So the IS structure currently in TESOL is kind of a one-size-fits-all. All ISs follow the same organization and the same rules. But not all ISs are equal in the way that members interact with them. And so the idea of nimbleness is that we can create kind of a structure for ISs or components, as they're called, subgroups of the organization, that allows for the creation and dissolution of components as needs change, varying types of components, for example, that best serves the members and provides the value that they're looking for. And also, having a nimble structure would allow TESOL to take advantage of different opportunities and tolerate risk without having to change the structure all the time, because it's more flexible. Another important concept that we found out was trust. So the association research shows that there's a very strong relationship between trust and nimbleness. And without trust, volunteer leaders can't serve, and building trust involves clear and frequent communication, having a well-defined structure where everyone understands their role in the organization's ability to achieve its goals. So we also looked at the importance of knowledge-based decision-making, basically being able to make decisions based on data and knowledge rather than commonly held misbeliefs or fears. And TESOL relies heavily on its ISs now to provide knowledge about the field to make important decisions. Can you go to the next slide, please? So KBMCs, or knowledge-based member communities, are also called communities of practice. And this slide shows some of the most important characteristics of successful communities of practice. Most importantly, communities of practice are not isolated entities with their own goals and values separate from their parent organization, but they unite their members around a common goal, common practice or identity, and the members work together to support the goals of the community of practice and the parent organization. And there's effective use of technology for frequent interaction and professional development. Can you go to the next slide, please? Some of the characteristics we found from the online gaming literature was that one of the most important aspects of communities of practice are the leaders. In the research, it was shown that there were 3 types of members in a community of practice. About 15% make up the core and they're active leaders in the group and in their field, and they keep the group running and bring legitimacy to it. About 20% are active but are not leaders, and the remaining 65% are referred to as peripheral members. They watch the core group and maybe learn and observe them and then implement what they see in other places. So in order for the group to be successful, the core must, the 15% must create opportunities for the peripheral members to interact with the other types of members and encourage the peripheral and active members to move into the core as others move out. So using collaborative tasks that involve all of the 3 member types, such as trainings and workshops, creating models of practice, solving problems, having discussions about relevant topics, and sharing resources are some ways that you can build that trust and cohesion in the community of practice. So now Tamara is going to talk about what we found out by surveying other professional associations. Tamara?
Hi. Okay, so as Justin was just saying, after we had done all this reading about knowledge-based member communities and after we had decoded the charge set by the board, we had a discussion, next slide please, and created 20 questions, a 20-question questionnaire based on some of these themes from the literature review, and with the aim of getting to the bottom of what some other professional organizations do in terms of knowledge-based member communities. So we spent a great deal of time on this questionnaire. I won't read out all of the themes, but I thought I might share with you some of the questions that we asked on the questionnaire just to give you an idea of what we were looking for. We asked, for example, what are the procedures and requirements for establishing a new knowledge-based member community? What are the requirements for maintaining the group status? We also asked, do your knowledge-based member communities have formal functions? And how do they strengthen your association in building community, sharing knowledge, constructing content-specific professional development, and overarching network opportunities? And we were interested in finding out about what their volunteer expectations were in other organizations. So we asked, how do you try to maximize the impact of your volunteer leaders' time and effort? How do you measure volunteers' return on investment? Next slide, please. So we identified 30 professional associations, but because there was no way we could do this, ask these questions of all of them, we had to narrow the list down to 15. We tried to focus those 15 were organizations that would be familiar to anyone in ESL, TESOL, maybe JALT. We also contacted Actiful. But some of the organizations that we talked to were outside of ESL and TESOL related activities. I spoke to someone from the American Library Association and also from someone from the Americans for the Arts. So we tried to look at organizations that might be similar to ours and different. We also surveyed organizations in varying size and with varying membership structures. We conducted the questionnaires by phone, by Skype, and by email, and again, our purpose was to examine the function, the structure, the leadership, governance, and communications within other organizations. Next slide, please. We made a lot of really interesting observations. and I'd just like to talk about a few of them. In the experience of one association, just rebranding knowledge-based member communities was really tricky. It wound up they were undergoing transformation of sorts, and they just tried to rebrand their knowledge-based member communities, and that didn't work. They weren't able to improve or really substantially change anything. So rebranding it is not going to be successful necessarily. The other thing many organizations stressed was the need for good online communication in order to have a thriving international organization. The online platform and the communication software has to be streamlined, it has to be easy to use. Some organizations did not find that the effort put into traditional newsletter type publications was valuable, and some organizations were had chosen or were choosing to stop publishing those kinds of publications. In some associations, members avidly compete for volunteer positions, and in fact, one of the organizations I was speaking to, I said, do you have trouble getting volunteers? Because that was something that some IS leaders have complained about in the past, that it is difficult to get people to volunteer to run for positions. And she was completely surprised to hear this, and she said that people want to be volunteers, that they compete for those positions. So we found that really interesting to hear. Next slide, please. In different associations, there was a wide variety of levels of control and structure of their knowledge-based member communities, and some had each community had its own staff member. In some, there was the knowledge-based member communities, just as the slide said, suffer from a form of benign neglect. Some were left completely on their own. As well, there was a great deal of variation in the flexibility of these communities. Some came together briefly only to discuss a particular issue, and then they dissipated. Others had to pass through several levels of qualification to become a stable group, so they might have started out as one of these loose groups only focused on a particular issue, and then they got a certain number of members or passed a certain number of qualifications and became much more formal within the association. Some associations required payment from members to be involved in any of the knowledge-based member communities, and some of them they could join as many as they wanted. Some of them, if there was more than one, as it used to be with TESOL many years ago, if you wanted to be involved in more than one, you had to pay. And in some associations, these communities are nearly autonomous. They offer their own publications, their own conferences. They operate completely separate from the parent organization. And in some cases, they even paid their fees back to the parent association in return for this autonomous decision-making power. So we thought that was interesting as well. Next slide, please. Finally, in one association, Pre-Convention Institutes consist almost entirely of all-day member community, knowledge-based member community offerings. And another organization had just recently conducted a survey. I believe it was the American Library Association, had actually paid someone to come in and survey their members, and they found that about 20% of the members were what they called network builders. 20% were active leaders. Another 20% were what they called enthusiasts, active but not leaders, just participating in different mini organizations within the community. And fully 60% may participate silently. They called them the lurkers, I think. They appreciated the offerings, but they didn't have any desire for further involvement. And what the American Library Association found was that this was not just true about their organization, but actually was pretty consistent across the board with many other organizations, this 20-20-60 breakdown. But all of the organizations we talked to were interested in using knowledge-based member communities to engage their members, and this is, for all of them, this was a very important aspect in keeping their members happy and reaching their members. So that's it for the survey observations. Now, hopefully, Elizabeth Chan will give us an overview of what we found by looking at some earlier governance work and reviewing IS annual reports and assembly minutes. Elisa has just finished teaching a 3-hour class, so we hope she's made it back in time for the webinar.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks so much. I ran. I said, sorry. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the Governance Review Task Force and the overall findings that we took from there and then used also as we looked at intersections in particular. But they reported that many IS leaders are first unaware of how their group really fits into the larger association of TESOL. The purpose for the intersections and how decision-making works inside of the intersections. So that they felt much of their time was taken up with administrative duties, and I think that's a lot of the work surrounding the convention as well. And they felt that communication with other levels of the association was often inadequate. So sometimes we may not know who exactly in TESOL central office we need to contact in order to get certain things done. The GRTF also found that the quality of work performed by different intersections varied very greatly, and we're going to, I'll mention that again a little bit later. So there was also concern that the vast majority of these ISs focused, again, around the convention, and we'll go into more detail with that. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we also wanted to get a little bit of feedback from those leaders who are here today and see if those are also some of the concerns that you've had or you've experienced or questions about those. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and if you have a comment or question, please feel free to just type that into the chat box. So I'll wait just a minute or so.
Hey, Elizabeth, I'm not seeing anything right now, so if you want to continue on, I think that's fine.
Okay.
And to the participants, if you have a question at any time, feel free to type it into the chat box and we'll make sure. Oh, Walton just commented that these were definitely his concerns, that he agrees with what the Governance Review Task Force found.
Okay, excellent. So I think also with my own experience, I found myself in these situations too, maybe not knowing exactly who to contact, or if we had generated an idea within the intersection, how to go about achieving that and making that happen.
And Elizabeth, I would like to read another comment. This is also from Walton. It says, last year we tried to do some year-round activities and got a variety of responses that contradicted each other. And in some cases, we were told we weren't supposed to do anything but work on the convention.
Wow, that's very interesting.
It is interesting.
But I can definitely understand getting mixed messages, especially when when we may not, as indicated by different leaders, we may not know who exactly we are supposed to contact for certain things. So I'm going to move on now and talk about the annual reports that were submitted by the IS leaders. So following up on these findings, we looked into the annual reports from 2012 to 2015 for all 21 interest sections, as well as the meeting minutes from each of the annual IS Assembly meetings for the span of 5 years, from 2010 to 2015. And much of what we found was that it supported the same kind of findings that the Governance Review Task Force found as well, that there seems to be a main focus on the annual convention, although maybe, and then the analyzed documents also point to a concern about having more year-round IS activities, and I know that was a big message from the Governance Review. The focus on the annual convention also might be part of the way that we report back to TESOL as well as an IS leader in these annual reports because of the structure of the questioning. But it's not really clear whether it's difficult to determine whether that emphasis is generated within the ISs or within the association as a whole. But regardless of its source, the focus of IS energy and activities on the annual convention extends to both IS accomplishments and challenges. Conference activities highlighted by IS leaders include the quality and quantity of their special sessions, the academic sessions and the intersection sessions, as well as adjudicated sessions. So, for example, one leader brought up a concern that sometimes when we are forming our primary and secondary intersection sessions, it's a little bit of a first come, first serve, who can get to a certain intersection leader first and have that discussion about the joint session. Social activities arranged by IS leaders and members, activities at the IS booth, and pre-convention events. The most frequently mentioned challenges that ISs and IS leaders face are related to the proposal adjudication process, including selection, training, and assignment of reviewers, the reliability of the reviews, and the training provided to the chairs who manage the whole process, or a large part of the process for their interest section, and technical issues with the platform as well. So these other challenges regarding the convention also included things like scheduling. So for example, I know for social responsibility in the upcoming convention, we have actually 4 important sessions that are scheduled at the same time, including our primary intersection and our academic session. So there were issues like that brought up by IS leaders. And the programming and the planning concerns as well as the costs. So the leaders also gave some feedback, including how we can address some of these issues. So I'll go to the next slide, please. All right, so apart from, or sometimes overlapping the convention, we also saw in the reports challenges and concerns about leadership and communication. In terms of the leadership, frequently named difficulties related to not really understanding exactly what is part of our role and what is not part of our roles. Maybe what should the chair do, what should the past chair do as well. So for the IS leader roles and responsibilities, and a difficulty in filling the volunteer leadership positions, which Tamara talked about a little bit earlier, also was something that came up during the interviews with other associations. So many requests were made for more training and as well as more mentoring for the leaders as they come in. Some leaders also suggested maybe that leaders serve for a longer period of time to help with this adjustment, or by giving more incentives for volunteer leaders including but not limited to conference and convention discounts or monetary means. So other challenges that we've had brought up were also with communication issues, not just inside of the association, but also inside of an interest section, including using the TESOL community platform. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so according to the reports and the assembly minutes, activities that the ISs engage in outside of the convention really vary. So within the 21 interest sections, not every single interest section is doing the exact same types of activities, and also not to the same extent as well. So different interest sections have done things. The most common things listed on these reports outside of the convention were the newsletters and then special projects. So in addition to the issues identified in the annual reports and discussed at the annual assemblies, oh yes, sorry, I meant to say next slide, thank you. In addition to these, within these reports, leaders also reported and discussed at the annual IS assemblies, put forth different motions and different drafts, but most of these were also related or surrounded the convention itself and didn't refer so much to outside the convention. In fact, all but one motion and all of the resolutions were related to the annual convention. Inconsistency in meeting the requirements to maintain the IS was also a little surprising for me, but I'm sure to other leaders as well, that when we were trying to analyze the reports, some leaders over the span of these years had not turned in these annual reports, even up to 1/3 of those interest sections, as well as when we looked at the attendance at the IS assemblies, not all ISs were represented at the assembly. Sometimes up to 1/4 of the interest sections didn't have a representative at the convention, at the assembly. So both these minutes and the annual reports really work together and paint this picture that there's a lack of understanding for the procedure of bringing resolutions to the board as well. Finally, should be noted that the ISs were not all consistent. So even if we are looking at the submission of the reports from year to year, it might change. It might not always be the same interest section. But all of these speak to the need to examine the requirements for knowledge-based membership communities within TESOL, and also the option of or possibility of forming different types of membership communities and seeing where we go with that in the future, and the expectations regarding not just the activities here, but also the structure of those membership communities. So to get more information, we did put out some surveys. So Sarah Saar from the TESOL office is going to share with us some highlights of the results of 2 surveys that we commissioned earlier this year.
Sure, and before I go there, and for those of you who are communicating in the chat box, thank you so much. And the reason why I'm reading your comments out loud is because the recorded version does not pick up the chat. So we're going to start by reading through what people are saying, and I think there's some really good points here that we want to make sure that the people who listen to this recorded version hear what you have to say as well. So starting with Heather. She would like to concur with the findings of the Governance Review Task Force. When she first stepped into as IS chair, she didn't know where her IS fit within the organization or who to contact for information. And Ryan Miller commented that our IS did a survey of members a couple years ago, and our membership said that the IS activity was too focused on the annual convention, and they wanted to move to more year-round activity. Since then, we've tried to do more year-round activities, such as monthly webinars, and those have been very successful. We're still thinking of what kind of year-round activities we can do, and it would be nice to hear what other ISs have done.
This is Michelle. I'll go ahead and read Walton Burns's comment, and he said that his IS would love to do more webinars, and he would love to hear from Ryan on how his IS did that, and how he got his members involved and what kinds of topics they discussed. And Ryan also commented that training for IS leaders is very important. He and a number of other IS leaders that he's talked with have received little information from TESOL about how to do that, and most of the information they've received has been from asking previous leaders in ISs what they've done, so mentorship is definitely very important. And Heather also chimed in and said she wonders if intersections can have a voice in PCIs, so the pre-convention and post-convention institutes at the convention, so that the interests of different ISs can be represented, or maybe give the IS leaders more flexibility in filtering through the proposals so that presentations can line up with IS content interests. And Heather would also like to hear from Ryan about how his IS sort of organized the webinars. And Ryan responded by saying that the platform that was used was GoToMeeting, and it was hosted by TESOL. And he said actually rather than webinars, they've been more of an online discussion. So they've chosen a topic relevant to their IS, and he's a part of second language writing intersection. So that was definitely one of the topics they chose was feedback on writing, and another one was on writing assessment. And they often invite a known person in that topic area to speak on that topic, and they also prepare a few discussion questions to talk about beforehand and throughout the online discussion. And he said there's been about 20 people who've participated in those, and Walton really likes what Ryan's done. So thank you for your comments, everybody.
And I guess we're moving on to my part of the webinar today. So I'm Sarah Sarr, Director of Professional Learning and Research here at TESOL. And what was really exciting about this task force in general is we had equal representation about people in the IS world, people on staff, and also board participation. So that was really wonderful. And go ahead. I'm actually pretty lucky to be able to talk about the member surveys, and so you'll find that TESOL is trying to be more proactive in receiving data to make sure that we're making decisions that are supported by the data collected in a variety of surveys. And the first survey that we looked at was the 2014 Member Needs Surveys. And you'll see here, many people believe that TESOL ISs are very and extremely important. They're also, over 50% are extremely satisfied or very satisfied with what the ISs do. An interesting thing based on what Tamara was talking about earlier, TESOL likes newsletters. So our ISs have done a very good job of putting out high quality newsletters, and they rank 5th among TESOL publications. But keep in mind, these are being rated against TESOL Quarterly and TESOL Journal. So that's one of the reasons why it's not number 1. But what's amazing is that IS newsletters are the publication that are read most by TESOL participants, and over 71% or 77% of people think that the IS newsletters are of good value. Now you'll notice the numbers here are at 502 and 503. That is from a survey where we collected data from 1,200 people in general. So about half of the people commented about the IS newsletters. The other thing is people do enjoy receiving information about TESOL on the IS listservs behind your regular e-blast, website, webinars, print, and social media. Yep, so then we moved on to this last January. We put out 2 surveys, one of them to TESOL IS leaders, and then the other one to general membership altogether. And I would like to congratulate the IS leaders. We had amazing response from this survey that went out this last January, which is wonderful because it actually does really build on what we were founding from the Governance Review Task Force, the annual meeting minutes, and the annual reports. Quite honestly, the IS leaders are very comfortable with the current structure of ISs. They believe that this one-size-fits-all allows for equity and fairness when it comes to resources. However, it doesn't really show the same level of commitment from all groups, and so even though this one-size-fits-all creates a model for equality and fairness, not all ISs take advantage of the equal amount of resource available, and so you find that some groups feel isolated, some groups feel like they don't get as much attention, and it's just a matter of how ISs are asking for resources from TESOL office and also from each other when they try to streamline and work together. This I thought was very interesting, and I think you can all agree with this. Regarding the election process for TESOL leadership, and this is similar to what Tamara was saying earlier, there's an appearance of democracy, but quite frankly, most candidates run unopposed when they're looking at running for TESOL leadership positions. And so even though we have these elections, they're not really competitions in a way a regular election is put forth. Many IS leaders suggested that there should be longer terms for IS leaders to build continuity and to connect with not only other TESOL IS leaders, but also other TESOL leaders. There was a huge interest in wanting to connect with the up-and-coming professional councils that are coming, which are replacing the standing committees, and then also more direct communication with the board of directors, I think was something IS leaders were looking for as well. And similar to what Elizabeth was saying, obviously all IS leaders are looking for more attention and training on what it is that they should be doing. So creating an IS procedure manual with clear IS responsibilities, a yearly calendar, avenues to report their successes, and clear accountability measures. And I think this clear accountability measures was really interesting. Several IS leaders asked for, if we don't do what we're supposed to do, somebody needs to hold us accountable. And I think that is a very wonderful transition and a very mature way of looking how TESOL what we might do as an organization with building new knowledge-based member communities. The next slide is about the member survey. And this was actually, for a lot of us, a little bit sad, but not surprising. 20% of the survey participants were not sure if they were a member of an IS, and even more shocking, 36% of the general membership did not even know that ISs existed. So there's obviously a communication gap here. For allowing new members to know what ISs are and how they can become a part of it. The general membership would also see more types of knowledge-based member groups, as in like maybe there's high-functioning member groups and low-functioning member groups. This is something that has been done by other organizations that we found in our interviews with the other associations. So that's something that the general membership wanted. And then also the general membership were confused about how come some ISs were very active and some of them were not. So I think it was a great representation of both what the IS leaders had to say and what the IS members, or the TESOL members had to say about where ISs stand. And I think this data definitely helps support a lot of what IS leaders already knew. And we have a couple of comments that we would like to read out. Oh, I'm so sorry, I jumped ahead. Are any of these things surprising? Are these survey results surprising to any of you? And while you're typing in to the chat box, we'll read out what some other people have said.
So Ryan has commented and he said, I found that many TESOL members don't know what ISs are or that they exist. I've noticed this when talking with colleagues at his university or talking with people at the convention. Once people realize that ISs not only exist, but they're free to join and participate in, they are quite excited. So Ryan's question here is there any way for TESOL to help TESOL members become more aware of ISs, their functions, and their benefits?
I would like to say yes. This is Sarah, and I think this is definitely a part of the next steps with the IS task force. And are there any more comments here? Because I kind of want to say that I'm going to leave the answer to that question to Joe when he picks up in the next part, because I think he's going to address some of that. But before we do that, Heather comments that she agrees with longer terms for IS leaders, and she feels like she's just getting to know what the role of the IS chair is, and her year is almost over. The convention work took a lot of attention over the summer, and by the time we got around to figuring out how to serve the community, the year was almost halfway over. And Walton says a manual would be great. It would be helpful if it also included these resources TESOL provides to ISs and how to access them. Wonderful. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joe. He's going to talk briefly about our next steps, and I think there'll be another opportunity for questions before we're done.
Right. Thank you, Sarah. I wanted to share with you a little bit about the options that we presented to the Board of Directors and then what the next steps are going to be in the process. If I could have the next slide, Michelle. As part of our charge, we were asked to present some detailed options for the board to consider in the area of functions of intersections, the structure of intersections, and communication both within intersections, between intersections, with intersections and the board, intersections and the association as a whole, and so on. And so as part of our report to the board, we submitted a fairly detailed list of various options. These were not recommendations. We didn't say, you know, you should definitely do this and not do that. It was more, here's some things that you could consider, some different ways that you could think about how function, structure, and communication. And we haven't shared those options with you here today because we don't know which of those options the board is going to choose. And we didn't want to say, well, you know, it could be this, and then people could get all excited and the board could go in another direction. It's not our decision. It's not your decision. It's really up to the board to select from the available options. So our task force is essentially advisory to the board. So we're glad to, as part of our process, you know, we've solicited input from intersection leaders. The board has solicited input from us, but we're doing the research and sharing the options. It may be that the board will choose to come back to the membership and to seek further input, but we don't know that for sure. Next slide. But in terms of the next steps, the board will review our report and will meet to discuss those options. As a task force, we'll be sharing these findings again at the leadership briefing in Baltimore and also at a meeting immediately following the IS assembly. And just a minute, I'll put up a slide that will show you where and when those are going to be happening. It's possible that the board will publish this report. It's often what they do. We don't know for sure. And then we would anticipate that the board will announce its decisions, or that they may ask for additional feedback from the membership. We don't know for sure, but typically we could expect to hear something back from them sometime in the late spring or in the early summer. Could I have the next slide? So here's a list of when we'll be giving further reports at the conference in Baltimore. Tuesday morning, as part of the leadership briefing, to which I hope you've all received an invitation. Now, will be part of a larger conversation about governance review, which will also include the report of the affiliate task force. So it's actually going to be in a much more abbreviated form than what we've had time for here today. But then immediately following the intersection assembly on Thursday, we'll be talking a little bit about really presenting the same information in the Peel room at the Hilton. So that gives you a sense of what we've done to date, of what we anticipate is going to be happening next. And the next slide will ask if there are any questions you guys would like to ask at this point. Well, in the event that you haven't got any questions just now, in a minute we'll put up an email address where you could send questions if you have some additional thoughts. But I wanted to thank our task force. Oh, sorry, here's something from Heather. Heather says that she doesn't have any questions at the moment, but looks forward to more discussion about this at the convention, and thanks us for the presentation. And I wanted to thank our task force members for their participation, as well as the intersection leaders who have taken time to take part in this either live or for those of you who might be listening on the recording. And I'll turn it over to Michelle to conclude.
So with that, we'll conclude today's webinar. A recording of today's presentation, again, will be made available through the TESOL Resource Center, and that's something that I can email to the IS Leader e-list. If you have any questions regarding anything that was talked about today, you can email learn@tesol.org. Again, a special thank you to the Intersection Task Force and to all of you who were able to join us for today's live webcast. That concludes our presentation, so you can now disconnect.